the debate surrounding face masks and forcing people to wear them.
Hey guys, I've been thinking about this question for well over 10 years now, and I want to share some thoughts that I have on it. The question really is, do protests work? Are they effective? And I actually have three distinct problems with this, but I also have some positive things to say. I want to say that I'm not inherently bashing protests by any means. In fact, I'm encouraging it, and one of the purposes of this video is to expand on what we think of as a protest, because my main problem is with gatherings, and the fact that gatherings are commonly associated with the primary way that we are supposed to protest. And before getting into the negatives, again, let's focus on the positives. This is a way to get a message out. It is a way that anybody can write something on a piece of Bristol board and go outside and show some cars or some passing people, take some pictures of themselves doing it, show it on social media. It is absolutely a way to influence. And let me tell you that there are some heroes here, especially this guy, Justin. He's a superhero to me, that are organizing or participating in the organization of some of these things in key centers where there is a lot of action happening. That's where these types of actions are going to be most effective. And to tell you the truth, when I look at these images, it really warms my cold heart and gives me some much needed hope that we are going to get past this current situation if actions such as this do continue. But now I do want to focus on some of the negatives, and my three main problems with this is, number one, the target audience of a gathering or protest. Remember, I'm only talking about in-person gatherings. Number two, the manipulation of protests and gatherings. Number three, and I think most importantly, in which I'll focus most of my attention to, is the fact that it is really framed that going and gathering at a center of power of some kind, the factory, the mayor's office, the parliament, or whatever, the bank, the media house, that's the primary way that we protest. To protest something, an injustice, an oppression, anything that you have a problem with, we're led to believe through media, this is generations of cartoons and movies that lazily incorporate protest into their scripts and stories by people gathering outside of the source of power, basically, and kind of demanding change. Conversely, we're also kind of led to believe that in some circumstances this can work. You know, the cartoon mayor can come out and say, okay, the rabble outside have gripes, and I'm going to address those gripes.
People, calm down. Standing out here yelling rabble, rabble, rabble isn't going to help anything.
But we don't know what else to do, Mayor!
Now, to me, this is all a very fantastical situation, and it distracts from the historical fact that most change has not been accomplished through actually gathering. Some of it has. Sometimes people storm the gates and such, but I do want to get into a process of change that kind of actually reflects what we see, rather than just people deciding to show up and yell at the mayor or yell at the prime minister, and that actually affects change. So let's get into this. So number one, the target audience. Who really sees a protest? And again, I'm not denigrating the protests themselves. My problem is, in my experience in living in cities, traveling around them and such, is that protests can take either side. Often you have someone pro-abortion and then you have someone pro-non-abortion at the exact same meeting place, or you have pro-Israel and pro-Palestine people at the same place, pro-vegan, pro-industry, whatever it is. So the average person, as I'm walking by going about my business, I kind of just see commotion. And when it comes down to it, the busy people, the decision makers of this world, the people who run businesses, you know, they're really not paying attention to the type of commotion that is typically generated by a protest.
Early on, things became heated between protesters and counter-protesters, a common theme among these types of protests.
That is despite the type of attention that it can get mentioned earlier. You know, regular people can see it. You can post it on your social media and people can see regular people standing up for a message of change or something, any message that they want to get across. But the average person trying to get around the shuffle, maybe they have to be there. A lot of times it's annoying. A lot of times it's aggressive. I myself once lived in a downtown area in a major city where I had to cross through the kind of designated area where they protested things. And they pretty much had something to protest every day. You know, sometimes there was more people out there, obviously weekends a little bit more, but there were dedicated people out there spreading some kind of message, whether it was to get over some oppression or to promote something, maybe it's a religious idea or something like that. but they were really in the way, and it became an aggressive relationship where I wanted absolutely nothing to do with them, regardless of what they were promoting. And that's definitely not the form of all protests, but it's the form of much of it to the people who aren't paying attention. And it's a little bit more difficult to actually get people's sustained attention than just yelling and, waving flags and waving signs. Just a lot of people don't read them. Part of the truth for a lot of people, and what a lot of protesters don't realize. And they can have great intentions and all of that, but a lot of people aren't looking at it, and a lot of the important people aren't looking at it. And despite the cartoon depictions, I don't really think our decision makers are paying much attention to the protests, because they also experience them constantly. They've experienced them their whole career, probably their whole lives. There's always been people protesting something, and if they're trying to navigate politics, they know that they can't get caught up in everything that's going outside of the gates. It's just one way to look at it, and it is one way that I look at it. And when I focus my efforts, I really do target them to who I think is going to actually impact the change. In this case, one important point that I have here is during this thing that's going on right now, a lot of the rights have supposedly been taken away, but from my experience here this year, during this, I've been in some major cities and some of the most populated areas up here in this region, and nowhere have I seen any police that are designated to take care of this unspecified virus. There's no actual body that's been set up to detain people. Maybe there are in some places, but nowhere that I've been. And from what I see, it's really just people voluntarily doing what the TV has told them, or doing what the media has told them, or doing what the premier of the province has told them, or the dear leader of the country has told them, and that's it. There is no actual enforcement. So when it comes to protesting something like what's going on right now, my issue is that nobody is actually actively oppressing us. We are oppressing ourselves. There's paper signs on doors. Nobody is knocking on doors. Nobody is actively telling us to do anything. And we have a magic phrase that we've been given, which is, I have a health condition, which suddenly causes whoever's asking you to stop. It's quite silly, actually, that we don't see how cartoon like this is. And I don't know what exactly we are protesting. In my opinion, the primary audience here, the target audience, is the people themselves, and there's many ways to communicate to the masses. So this is one issue. Who sees these protests in a clustered area? The exception being if it's taken and posted on social media, so lots of people get to see it in an unobtrusive way, because they're not being interfered with. They're not trying to walk by and go to work. They're not trying to hear something else while there's people yelling outside, and they can't help but live right next door. They can't help but have to pass through this mob of people to get to the train station or whatever it is. The average person in the comfort of their own home can witness the opinions of other people, and this to me is just another form of content creation anyways. It's just standing outside with a sign. In fact, you could do this without a protest. You could stand out front of your house. You could get your family together and just write a sign and do that and make a post on social media. So it's another way to the exact same end result, and the end result is influencing a person through social media. So let's take one historical example here. The civil rights movement in America is commonly cited to begin with Rosa Parks, but actually 9 months before that, 15-year-old Claudette Colvin did the exact same thing. She initiated the first act that kicked off the civil rights movement, basically. Another hidden fact here is that year, in 1955, Rosa Parks completed a course in race relations at the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, where nonviolent civil disobedience had been discussed as a tactic. So she had been trained, and this was part of a movement that was growing. And I'm saying this because Rosa Parks did not go to City Hall. She didn't march on Washington. She had neither the resources nor the following to do that. She protested the act itself. The thing that was taken away from her right to sit in that seat, she defied it and sat in it. This would be the same as drinking from the water fountain they're not supposed to drink in, maybe not wearing something on their face when they don't want to. Whatever it is, whatever the oppression is, it's physically acting it out. Now, this instigated a large movement, and I want to emphasize here that no real legislation was put in place until around 1964. And then, of course, there was also major events continuing through the civil rights movement all the way until 1995, which is when the Million Man March finally happened. This is 40 years after the Rosa Parks and Claudette Colvin incidents, and the first march on Washington with Martin Luther King Jr. was not until 1963 anyways. So there's big periods of time, there's a movement going on here, there's lots of organization happening, there's lots of training happening, education within their ranks, And they did produce change, but it took quite a while. And a lot of people might think of the storming of Washington, the final act, as what we need to kind of do here. And I think a lot of people are really skipping a lot of steps, and they can be forgiven for this, again, because we've been presented that this is the way that we do protest, whereas in history, this really doesn't seem to be the case. So let's move on now to number 2, the manipulation of protests. Now this is more controversial and more conspiratorial, but I think it's very well established that several modern movements are indeed funded by people such as our friend of humanity, George, here. And I think it poses a large threat to the act itself. I think as we've been herded into the idea that we should all gather, sometimes even wear a uniform that seems to be presented to us, especially with covering the face, that it seems very easy to get anybody, even one, two, a small group of people, to go in and cause some mayhem.
The vast majority of people that have come to gather have been doing so peacefully. But there was a core group of people that had really been focused on causing some destruction. Certainly we saw that with some of the looting and setting fires. It was clear to me, and also hearing from our local community leaders, that many of the people that were involved in the criminal conduct last night were not known Minneapolitans to them. And so yes, there were certainly people who were involved in the activities last night that were certainly not recognized as being here from the city.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly, but fires have been started, and there's a crowd that is.
If you're just tuning in, you are watching our correspondent Omar Jimenez being arrested by state police in Minnesota. We're not sure why.
Bruh, they got them bricks, bruh. We are protesting. Shit crazy. Some random ass bricks, bro. Ain't no construction. Ain't no construction, bro. Just some random ass bricks sitting here.
This the setup.
They put them there on purpose,
y'all know
bro.
Where we at.
They gonna set them hoes right up on the route of.
Y'all know what building this is right here. I ain't even gonna say what name it is.
Hey, where do them bricks go to? Where do them bricks go to? Where do them bricks
we gotta
go to?
do better.
Ain't no damn
We gotta do better.
Ain't no.
Ask you to do that. Listen, don't spray stuff on here when they gonna blame black people for this, and black people didn't do it.
Bitch, don't give no group of black men no brick that don't do nothing. All right, push the fuck up.
Yo, what's up? Yesterday I was at the protest in Los Angeles and I saw the cop car that got lit on fire by people that weren't a part of the protest.
We see 3 of the characters involved. The woman in the purple backpack, the lady in the yellow hat, and the guy that's fully wrapped that lit the car on fire. I replayed this clip over because in the background you can hear somebody saying, "Why is it all white guys though?" Because it looks as though the lady in the yellow is talking to the man that lit it on fire. Alright, if you look closely in the bottom left, you can see the same woman that was spray painting earlier. You can see her backpack on her back and the top of her head, and you see a bottle in the air. She's throwing the bottle. She's the first one to start setting it off. So after slowly trying to get people to join in and partake, it doesn't work. So what do? Step 2, take it to the next level.
I think it doesn't make sense while it's here. It doesn't make sense while it's here.
Alright, yo, so this is my first time literally ever at a protest, and I'm sitting here watching it live, and you can hear me. I say, it doesn't make sense.
So immediately whenever the car starts getting smashed, we got my boy that's never skated a day in his life running in to smash the windows, which they need to smash so that they can spray the lighter fluid or gasoline inside the car. And this right here is what I mean when I say they're a team. The 2 skateboarders at the same time come from different sides, and they're swinging their skateboards at the exact same time. And immediately once the glass gets shattered, we have the woman throwing the water bottle into the car, which is lighter fluid. And look at the guy that's inside the car. You'll see what he's doing at the end of the video. And look who returns, the woman that started it all. She was the first woman to spray paint the car, throw something at the car, then she comes back with lighter fluid to help them get it on fire. And after successfully getting the car lit on fire, he runs away. And as fast as it started, they all get out of there.
A new cop car. This is an old cop car. They just lit it on fire. It was just sitting in the middle of the street.
Oh, and what was that popping sound? Oh, I'm guessing it was whatever the skateboarder put inside the car whenever he was reaching in there for so long.
Keep in mind, that whole thing happened within 1 minute. You have to practice that. You have to have some sort of training and a plan to do something like that quick, that effective, and that smooth.
This is an undercover cop in Minnesota. This guy goes to an AutoZone, which is like a car repair shop, and he starts smashing windows. Now, there's a peaceful protest going on. This guy is wearing basically Hong Kong riot gear. Nobody else in America had adopted this style yet. He's like the first one to really do it. Gas mask, all black, umbrella. Turns out, this guy is called Jacob Peterson of the St. Paul Police Department.
So you're undercover cops and you're sending people into the protests who are dressed like protesters, and he's lying to me and telling me he's a journalist, which is very bad for the journalistic profession, I would say.
Here we have video of police breaking a shop window for literally no reason. Try and justify any of this that you're watching. And here's another one. Multiple cops smashing the windshield of a cop car. Here's another one. A news reporter caught a county sheriff smashing a parked car. This helicopter captured it, and as it's happening, you see right there, I'll zoom in, the chopper pans away. Funny. It's like the media and the police are on the same side. Who'd have thought? Here's another one. New York City police breaking into a jewelry store.
So here we are witnessing NYPD's finest.
No explanation for this one. Doesn't look like there's any fire there. Doesn't look like anyone had already broken in and stolen anything. It kind of looks like they're opening a hole to allow looting. A Toronto city worker finds police officers placing rocks on the curb amid oncoming protesters.
You're putting rocks over there on purpose. Why are you putting them right there though? Because you know people are going to be at Nathan Phillips Square. You should be putting rocks right there. That's on purpose. It's not your job. I work for the city, so it's not your job to put rocks over there.
Okay, here we go. This is filmed from a skyscraper. Police unloading bricks from the back of a police truck. These cops are smashing medical supplies and water bottles that were left there for protesters.
We will be enforcing the law. Please leave the area peacefully and you will not be harmed.
Or push the dominoes over and perpetuate the momentum of a mob mentality. And I do think this undermines usually the message of whatever is being protested. So these people went there for non-violent, peaceful protests, which is what has been happening since Gandhi and the civil rights movement. Most of the people that are gathering in protest intend to do it non-violently, whereas it's just so easy to infiltrate this. And again, this is a conspiracy theory, but this seems to be what really happens. This seems to be what happens around the G20 riots, the G8 riots. This seems to be what happens this year in the George Floyd fiasco and Ukraine recently as well. And this is a threat that's quite hard to deal with for the average civilian. The average civilian thinking of participating in something really doesn't want to participate in violence, usually really doesn't want to introduce themselves to personal risk. And you got to think the people who have the most power in society or the most pull in their household or influence in their family, they're probably the people who don't want to put themselves in unnecessary risks. They're probably people with a lot of responsibility and who don't want to go out there and loot and riot, even if they have an opinion. So it discludes a lot of people by the nature of what the modern protest has become so often. And the problem is that social media effect from earlier, where my heart is warmed by seeing it on social media, those same events, when they're shown on the actual media to the real wider public, not just your personal audience, they tend to see a quite bastardized version of the original intentions.
While most people understand the reasons for wearing masks, today, a movement against mandatory face coverings held protests in major centers in Canada.
They came to sound the alarm for what they say is an unprecedented assault on freedom.
It's not a pandemic.
This man claimed to have sensitive knowledge that few in the working press seem to know about.
It's a shadow government that's doing it.
What shadow government?
You don't know about the shadow government?
No.
Okay, you haven't heard of the Illuminati?
One of the big points a lot of people here want to make is that we, the news media, are part of the problem. They say we're fake news, we're controlled by the federal government and Bill Gates. Here's what they say when we walk in there.
Fake news. You guys lie all the time.
I'm from Eastern Bloc and I can tell you, I can smell fake news. Everything what you guys doing is manipulating public.
Why are you wearing a mask?
What are you afraid of? Because you're harming your health.
How am I harming my health?
Wearing a mask is unhealthy.
The fake lying news to people.
Eventually, they started to block our cameras and finally gathered together to make this point about how they feel they're being covered.
Bonnie Henry's a pup. How does it feel?
Again, I'm quoting Salt Lake Tribune here. It's an act of submission to wear a mask. Jesus gives us a choice, and mandates are against freedom. What do you say to get them to change their mind?
Don't listen to the spin doctors, people.
And why do you think this is causing such emotional responses?
It's pretty consistently found that people who are protesting masks during this time, once you really start talking to them, they don't really care about police brutality and they don't really care about oppression of minorities.
You protest against masks? That's what you really care about when there's kids in cages?
If you think the government's so bad and so oppressive, realize that when minorities say that they're being oppressed and being killed and being arrested for no reason, it's talking about the same government, so why aren't you on our side?
So we're really looking at what we're constituting as our new normal, at least for now.
And they seem to see quite a select variety of the actual people present, and of course a select version of the message that's being presented. So the message ends up being distorted and controlled anyways at these public gatherings, and other forms of protests are actually far more difficult to interfere with. And problem number 3, the fact that we think of gatherings as the primary form of protest. Now, I think it's neither the primary form nor the most effective form, and when it is effective, it is the culmination of movements building. It's the climax of a lot of work and time and effort and people. And when we think it's our only action, we really might feel discouraged and taken away from the fact that we can do plenty, and we can do plenty that is very effective, and we can do plenty that any person can do. We just mentioned that the civil rights movement was kicked off by a 15-year-old girl. Right? What else can a 15-year-old girl do right now? A 15-year-old girl can write letters. She can write emails. She can post on social media. She can wear t-shirts with her opinion on it politely. She can ask her parents or guardians or grandparents to walk with her to the local police station so that she can give her handwritten letter that politely informs the police that she's a bit scared of them coming and making her take a needle, and she doesn't like wearing a mask. It makes her uncomfortable and hard to breathe, and she thinks it makes her health and experience of this world worse. That's a very polite way to go and communicate to the so-called enforcers of this, if they are actually enforcing it.
When police officers had to wrestle a man to the ground after he refused to wear a mask.
We're of course not asking merchants to physically get into a scuffle with someone who wouldn't comply. So in that case, they call the police to ask for the person to be expelled.
It's also a way that people can address schools. Schools are very tight-knit. A lot of schools are quite small. There's not that many parents involved. A lot of them know each other quite well. It'd be very easy to get together and talk to the school board and say, look, we're just not going to bring our kids in if they have to wear masks. This is destroying their experience of childhood, and we don't think it's doing them any good in protection. How about we take responsibility for whether they contract anything or not, and if your teachers don't feel comfortable, hire new ones. Or shut the school down, and let's talk on a wider national scale about eliminating the taxes for the school system that we apparently are no longer willing to operate with this risk, with this supposed risk that is present. One of the most effective forms of protests in the history of the world in all revolutions is pamphleting. This means individuals or groups, small groups, create a lot of literature. They put their opinion on paper, whether it's on a single piece of paper or a little pamphlet with a few pages. If they have more ability and power and execution in the production, they can also make media of some kind. If they're artists, they can turn it into music, whatever. But the pamphlets themselves are actually distributed to the people themselves. People could stand on street corners and hand them out. You could walk around your neighborhood and put them in mailboxes in the middle of the night so nobody sees you. You could post them up on store windows. You could go around town and put them on all the bulletin boards. You can pay for a billboard if you got the money. You can plaster posters up. You can wheat paste posters up. You could spray paint on property, depends on the property and depends on what you're willing and able to do. A very cheap way to put a very simple message up, something like, I don't want mandatory masks. I don't know, whatever the message is, however you want to present it, however you want to sell it. But really the most powerful acts of protests are directly refusing or disengaging with the oppression that is happening. It is sitting in the seat you're not supposed to. is allowing yourself to breathe correctly. It's not holding back communication from the people you know. It's stating your opinion politely and respectfully. It's doing something directly opposed to the action that we have a problem with. One example is the Boston Tea Party for the American Revolution. Again, it's a misconception that that itself is what kicked off the revolution. I would believe the pamphleting and the lobbying by the people who have taken this up as a political issue have stirred interest and education in the people there, and then they were able to do an aggressive act. Well, that was effective to some degree. It's also fire with fire. It also kicked off a war, right? So I'm not sure that is exactly what we want to do here, but it is an example of, it was the action itself that did it. They didn't go and storm the British Parliament and say, you better stop this. In most cases, they're not even going to be heard. In more cases, they're going to be mocked and condescended. And a lot of these people out there protesting are like, hey, the people that are involved, the people that are in charge, they're callous, they're condescending, they're selfish, and all this stuff. Well, why would we be asking those people to be the ones that fix the problem? And again, here in this case, and in a lot of cases, it's the people themselves that are just, it's a cultural problem. And we can influence the culture in many, many ways. We just mentioned a few. The pamphleting, you can knock on doors, by the way. You don't have to just slip envelopes into your neighbor's mailboxes. You can knock on doors. There's many groups who famously knock on doors to spread their messages. Let's talk about one, the Jehovah's Witness. Now, whatever you might think about the Jehovah's Witness, they have approximately 8.68 million followers. And I've been in many places and I've had these people knock on my door in several languages. Like, they are out there and they have spread their message. How? Knocking on doors and telling people, educating people. Many doors slam in their face, just like the vacuum cleaner guy, just like the newspaper collections kid. Some people give them a polite moment. Some people take their literature that they come with. P.S. Good strategy. Some of them invite them in for a talk. I happened to invite them in for a talk once because I wanted to figure out what they were all about. Rather than just seeing them as an obnoxious force, I thought to myself, there must be a good reason why these people are going out of their way to spread this message. So what is this message? Come on in and have a glass of tea, and let's talk about it. And they provided me some literature. It's not like they convinced me to join their thing, but they educated me on it. And I hear a lot of misconceptions about what this group in particular does. And with my little bit of education on the topic, I can say to some people, you know what you just said there, actually, it's not correct, or it's not fair. You know, you can bash any group for any reason you want, but you might as well be accurate in what they believe. It's good to know what people believe, and sometimes people do give you a chance, and sometimes you can make media that does affect people. Sometimes 10 people watch it, maybe 5 of them got an impact. Maybe you get better at doing that and you can impact 500,000 or 500 million. And these are the types of numbers that we are going to need. Unfortunately, we're looking around the major city centers and most people are wearing masks. Most people are complying with these mandates. And most people are accepting the sort of inevitable future this is leading us towards.
Libria, I congratulate you. At last, peace reigns in the heart of man. At last, war is but a word whose meaning fades from our understanding. At last, we are whole. The disease is human emotion. But Libria, I congratulate you. For there is a cure for this disease. At the cost of the dizzying highs of human emotion, we have suppressed its abysmal lows. And you, as a society, have embraced this cure. Prosium. Now we are at peace with ourselves, and humankind is one. War is gone. Hate, a memory. We are our own conscience now. And it is this conscience that guides us to rate EC10 for emotional content. All those things that might tempt us to feel again. And destroy them. Librians, you have won! Against all odds and your own natures. You have survived!
So I wanted to make this video partially to empower people who might feel like they want to do something, but might see going downtown and protesting as their only option. Well, it's most definitely not your only option. I live in a place where there's no point of protesting, as I mentioned. Who am I protesting? The town is not doing anything about this. There's no money being spent. There's no police on the roads. Nobody's knocking on our doors. People are simply voluntarily wearing masks. So in my opinion, my target audience is to influence the people themselves. Of course, I've taken a good long study of this, the study of sales seriously. I've taken the presentation of myself seriously, and so that those who will listen to me are not going to choose any of these factors to knock me off right away. So I present myself well, and I think these are kind of good golden rules in how to set up influence leading to a movement. Number one is look good. It means many things. It means act correctly. It means don't argue with people. It means look approachable, perhaps. If you look like a bunch of scraggly anarchists, it's going to be very difficult to convince the average person to come and join us. If we're all wearing a bunch of masks, I mean, this is not something that a lot of people want to run out their door and be a part of. This is something that a lot of people want to lock their door from. So in my opinion, being attractive, being open, honest, studying communication, studying the selling of ideas, studying influence itself, and using this as the foundation for everything else you do. Right? What do? We're all we're doing is talking about what we believe in and why. And easy way to be more effective at that is to study these practices behind it. Right now, a lot is happening. P.S. I don't want to make it look like, oh, we've just got to sit back and study for 5 years. If you want to protest, absolutely protest. Just keep these things in mind, and keep in mind that there's other things that you could be doing as well. Well, there's not a protest going on. You could be pamphleting, you could be postering, you could be knocking on doors, you could be sending out messages to people on Instagram or Facebook or any of these apps. This is free, right? You can send messages all day for free. You can write emails all day for free to important people, important businesses. Tell them that you're concerned about the future of their business. You'd love to participate in their business, but you really don't like this mask. I don't like being harassed about it, whatever it is. And when people get flooded with these letters, P.S., they might actually do something. This is a real way that you communicate with people. This is a real way that we tell businesses that we're on their side and not on the side of the mandates. The mandates, which P.S. cost them a lot of money too. A lot of them are closed unnecessarily. A lot of them have restricted hours unnecessarily. A lot of them are really hurting here. And I bet they are looking for excuses to ease up. And I'd like to hope that their constituencies, their customers, are with them. So let's tell them. Be honest. We don't need to know everything, but you need to be honest and sincere about what you do know, what you do feel, what you believe, and why. And put an honest effort into communicating that effectively and not just barking things at people.
Responsible.
Do the work. Do the work. Come up with a plan and execute it. Are you going to do pamphlets? Good. Sit down. Write it down. What are you going to say? Oh, I don't have time. I'm busy. Schedule 30 minutes tonight instead of watching a TV show. Write it down. Write down the pamphlet, type it up, print it out at home, print it at Walmart, print it down the street at the convenience store, print it wherever you can, and go and put them in mailboxes. And do it with discipline. Don't expect change to happen overnight. Don't expect one round of posters to mean anything. One round of posters might get taken down the next day. One billboard might get taken down. One sign on your lawn might get taken down. Your letters might not get read the first time. They might not get read the 17th time. You might need to keep going. You might need to form a culture around these practices and these daily actions. You might need to have a culture that knows part of what they do is hold meetings to educate people in nonviolent tactics of protest. You might need to knock on doors regularly in an attempt to educate people. You might need to hit 40 doors before one person lets you get one word out of your mouth. And you need to formulate these and be disciplined in their practice. It's not just showing up with a sign. It really isn't. But P.S., if you are going to show up with a sign and you do it a lot and you do it with discipline and people see what you're doing and they know what you're about, you're going to attract more and more people to show up with you with those signs. That is going to create more impact. That's what we've seen with Justin there and others. But he's definitely done the work, is my point. They're not just showing up. There is something more behind it, and there is education behind it as well, especially on their social media accounts, of course. Getting people up to speed about the broader concepts that lie behind why we are actually going to protest anything in the first place. Accept risk. This is a mandatory component of any protest. This is something that a lot of people are falling off on now. A lot of people are saying it's too much hassle. I just wear this thing on my face because it's too much hassle. I don't want to be harassed. Well, there is a bit of risk to standing out. There is a bit of risk of people judging you. There's a bit of risk of people yelling at you. In some cases, there's risk of violence. I've heard of people being physically assaulted for not wearing a mask. This is a risk. And in my opinion, it must be accepted if you feel, like I do, that enough is at stake, where it is worth some risk. And we can't just follow orders, and we can't just let our world turn into a dystopian movie from the future.
I had you sequenced. I read your profile. I'm sorry.
So within this, I've mentioned the next point, basically. Keep going, keep leading, keep educating. In this process, you create new leaders. This is how a movement builds, grows, and carries on into the future. This is how groups of people not only care about the rights that are at stake, but know how to tactically protect them. And this is what creates real change in the long term. PS, and I mean huge change. I mean walls coming down and regimes being overrun and massive cultural change. This does take real discipline, organization, and execution over the long term. This brings us to the basic message of political activism, in my opinion, which is to be the change, which is summing up kind of all my problems here with the act of protest itself. Is I was brought up to believe in the anarchist circles that I tended to hang around with and read that you are the protest, you are the change, your life is the protest. You live in a way that reflects the values you want to see in the world. The more serious you are about that, the more of these other types of actions you participate in, but already everything you're doing is reflecting what you believe in. There isn't hypocrisy, at least to your understanding. Maybe, again, you don't know everything or you don't understand everything properly, but you're acting according to your own values. And within this, you are going to refuse unnecessary, silly non-solutions to non-events perpetuated by the media and whatever else it is that you believe in, whether it's animal rights or marriage rights or property rights. You're going to influence many people because you are going to be a person that represents this, number one, and hopefully you're going to do those other things in becoming a person of influence and taking the study of influence seriously enough where you really are making change in the world every step you take. And for the most part, once you're there, you don't need to show up at a protest. But if you do show up, your presence is going to be really something. It might even be commented on by the media, by the regular media, and it might not even be as distorted as it could be because you spoke clearly and eloquently and because you built up a following of people who know what you're about and who will defend you from any unnecessary attacks as well. Meaning you got a movement behind you. You step up as one leader within a movement. So given what we've just discussed, I want to check out this article, 13 Significant Protests That Changed the Course of History. And hopefully we can look at these under a new light. The George Floyd protests, arguably the fakest.
2 police officers get out the back of the ambulance. They don't even check his vitals, they don't check if he's alive. They just kind of roll him onto a stretcher, put him in the back of the ambulance, and then have a chat, and then leave. There were no ambulance sirens, no medical, they aren't EMTs, they're not paramedics. They didn't check his vitals, they didn't do any kind of assistance or medical assistance on the spot. They just presumed he was dead and moved on. These guys are armed and wearing bulletproof vests. They're not medics, they're cops. 2 cops got out of the back of an ambulance. Why is no one talking about that?
Most acted.
The owner of the store just said that the patron was already out of the store once the clerk realized that it was a counterfeit bill and then called the police. Then the police arrived shortly thereafter, and they were able to immediately identify George and where he was located.
All right, what's your name?
We hear the first officer just beginning to question George, asking for identification and then his name, only after he had him removed from the vehicle and sitting on the ground first. Why were the cops later called for an alleged counterfeit $20 bill when it's any cashier's duty to make sure that bills above a particular value are real or not way before accepting them?
Most questionable.
Why did the initial 2 officers on the scene leave the 2 passengers on the sidewalk unattended? in order to bring George back to their police vehicle way across the street. They walked up to the SUV, ordered them to get out, threw handcuffs on George, and began to question each of them on the sidewalk. But what was their actual reason for arresting George Floyd in the first place?
Most provocative events of recent times.
Why are the cops keeping George pinned down to the ground while waiting for an ambulance to arrive? What took place before this incident that calls for George needing medical attention? This officer is clearly wearing a body cam. So why haven't we seen footage from his perspective yet? Why are paramedics that arrived on the scene wearing bulletproof vests and dressed as if they are police officers, carrying weapons?
Many would say directly paid for by a certain friend of humanity in order to perpetuate certain other conflicts. It's very hard for me to reconcile why this is even on the list and what it has even achieved other than some mayhem,
Fires have been started.
division,
Things became heated between protesters and counter-protesters.
property damage, and an overall sour taste in the eyes of many people watching this spectacle. Next, the March for Science. I don't know if you've ever heard about this. I certainly do not think that this had any real impact on our world. I don't know about you. Certainly the climate change movement itself and environmentalism itself has gained a lot of foothold in the world and a lot of influence, but I doubt that this event had much to do with it. The Women's March on Washington. Now again, I have to look this up. January 21st, 2017. I had no idea. I don't know if you did. But again, the women's movement has been going on for a long time, and there's been many gains made in recent years that I really just highly doubt that this had much to do with. Give an example. There's a lot of talk in recent years about a female infiltration in Hollywood, movie studios, record labels, newspapers, and I'm going to say that there's a lot of hard work behind that. I'm going to say that some of these people hung around power for a long time, the big names in these industries, and hung around the big projects and made themselves useful in some way and gained political power over a long period of time until they were finally able to implement the climax of their master plan. And I think there's many examples of this, and I think those key players are very unlikely to be in the crowds here. And not discounting the influence that any of these people may have had, especially by spreading it to their own followings on social media, but the people who have implemented the real things that we see in the end result of the women's movement, those people put in a lot of hard work. There's a lot of organization and discipline. They had to put up with a lot until they finally got something done. Next is the Protestant Reformation. Now, to me, this is an excellent example of pamphleting. It's often cited as the prime example of how pamphlets and door-to-door and going to street corners can actually get something massive done. And the Protestant Reformation, led by Martin Luther in 1517, it was just one event, a culmination of a lot of effort going on here. And of course, this was enabled by the printing press itself, and it was utilized to great effect to enact major change that we still see this change reflect in our world today, hundreds of years later, 500 years later. The storming of Bastille. This is again the finale moment of the French Revolution. To put it on a list like this discounts the amount of work and the amount of political activism that were behind the scenes leading to events like this. Gandhi's Salt March. Now this is an excellent example of protest, and this is part of my grievance with the modern conception of protest, is that Gandhi pretty much reinvented the way that we go about protest. He kind of invented the modern packaging of nonviolence, and his iconic Salt March did achieve a lot, according to history, and of course, his influence is still going on today, and it's still influencing people who do want to see a better world today. And did he do it by showing up at the doors? Well, kind of, but he had a very creative way of getting there and stirring a lot of momentum on his way there, And kudos to him, and maybe something like this could be implemented in our modern times as well, though it doesn't need to, because I think if Gandhi had social media, I think he could have had a different strategy and been just as effective. The Boston Tea Party we already talked about. Again, the culmination event, the finale event, the third act of a large movement of discontent against the British domination of America. Next, South Africa's National Day of Protest. This is one of the prime examples of complete mobilization of a population against the dark oppressive force. They did this with a movement, they did this with discipline, they did this with violence and non-violence. They put a lot of work in over a long time before they were able to finally protest en masse, and that of course did topple the power. Next, the March on Washington, which we've already discussed, and that happened 8 years after the initial incidents on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Tiananmen Square. To me, this isn't as much of an example of protest as it is an example of how one human being can stand up against the giant totalitarian oppressor, how one human being can reach out to the humanity of the enforcers of the oppressors and make a really dramatic statement that has lasted through history. Even though it was, of course, a violent situation, and of course there are still problems in this exact area, but it was not for nothing. That action did accomplish a large influence. And of course, this is not an isolated incident. There is, of course, much political activism going on way before this event. The Berlin Wall protests, pretty much the same scenario. What they actually accomplished was tearing down the wall, but what they accomplished was doing it physically. And of course, that's the combination, that's the pinnacle moment of a movement that has already existed for quite a long time and gained momentum through actions, continued actions. Iraq war protests. Well, I don't know about you, but to my knowledge, we're still in Iraq, which makes it one of the longest wars in history, or one of the longest occupations in history. By June 2020, the Iraqi government had yet to act on the January parliamentary resolution to call the departure of foreign troops. So they are still there, 17 years later. So I don't know what this is supposed to say. Did this change anything? Well, I don't know. I know there was a lot of people making a lot of noise about Iraq. There's a lot of things being written. There was movies made. It was mentioned in music. And there was a huge cultural movement against the armies of America being in the Middle East, and specifically Iraq. Did this protest do much? I don't know. Personally, I had never heard of this protest before right now on this list. The Orange Revolution. Now, this is an excellent example of a pinnacle of a massive state of unrest.
Demonstrators clash with police, with hundreds of thousands protesting the results of the election and calling for a new vote.
Of course, all these people were very much against the overt corruption. Supposedly, this is a story. I wasn't there. And they did, indeed, affect change. But this is more of a forceful storming of the gates than a protest itself. Really, this is an overwhelming mass of people calling for restitution of an injustice, a specific injustice, and it was indeed done. And so that's the list that they've got there. My take on it is that there's many things going on leading to change, and I don't think the protests can get all the credit, and I don't think we should feel discouraged from not being able to participate in this, because within these events, there's so many different actions, there's so many different roles to play, different ages of people can participate in to finally get us to a revolution. Now, I know this video is getting a little bit long, and I'm going to wrap it up with something that was just sent to me as I was making this video, and I think it kind of sums up the sentiment on both sides of our culture right now, and sort of how the issue itself is being portrayed. The first comment is, stop demonizing riots. Without riots, you'd still be working 10 to 12 hours, 6 days a week. And that is fair on one level, but I would expand the statement to say that without education, motivated leaders carrying through a disciplined, coordinated plan in order to build momentum and popularity in the people that are being oppressed, then yes, at that point, the riots or the storming the gates or the mass demonstration is quite effective, and it is absolutely a part of historical change. But we're really only looking at the riots themselves. We're really being encouraged to kind of just go out there, go downtown and join the mob. And this is discounting all of the intellectual and academic and sort of military organization behind the actually successful movements of history. And the next comment here is, the main contradiction of liberal democracy is that it has largely been shaped through a history of various forms of illegal civil disobedience against entrenched power structures. Such civil disobedience is retrospectively seen as justified, and the people committing it are retrospectively seen as heroes. But each successive generation is asked to believe that any further civil disobedience would be unreasonable. Now, I think that's a very eloquent explanation. And though it might be a little bit difficult to disentangle for someone who isn't versed in this political lingo, what it really means is that change has been enacted by people refusing to be stepped on or taxed unfairly, by people asserting their own dignity, asserting whatever power they do have, building that on that power, taking power back from the controlling forces, etc. This is a commitment. This is a long-term project for every individual who is involved, with their own spread of motivations and their own spread of possible actions and influences. Real change, the happy ending of the story, comes after all of this stuff. So I think this has given us a lot to think about, guys. I appreciate you, and I hope you do share this with some people, because there are a lot of people who are looking for things to do and they don't know what to do, and they might feel downtrodden about it, whereas right now is not the time to feel down. It's not the time to feel disempowered. There is a lot at stake, there's a lot to do, and we've got to get to it. So thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
Every single American should be wearing a mask when they're outside for the next 3 months at a minimum. Every governor should mandate mandatory mask wearing. It's not about your rights, it's about your responsibilities.
That's what real leadership looks like. Joe Biden said that as a nation, we should all be wearing a mask.
So we're really looking at what we're constituting as our new normal.
They want to take away our freedom, take away our rights.
There is no pandemic. There is no pandemic.
And somehow wearing a mask has become this political flashpoint.
Take away everything, wearing a mask, which is really a muzzle.
Are you going to allow the government to tell you you have to wear a mask?
Here in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, definitely 100,000% against all the media and the mask bullshit. So let's keep on uniting and let's keep on rising. Peace.
You could call it a mask mutiny.
I just want to say that I'm against masks because it's a load of absolute BS. It does nothing for your system. It doesn't protect you at all. The microns of a virus are smaller than the weavings of the mask, easily penetrating any freaking mask, unless if you have those biohazardous Star Wars looking things. So don't believe in the rhetoric. It's just a scare tactic. Turn off your TV. CNN, MSNBC, stay away from those guys. Get outside, get some sun, get your minerals and vitamins. Stay woke, people.
Wearing a mask can actually cause you to get sick.
You're not hearing me though. You're not hearing me though.
But the growing refusal to cover one's face is triggering a crackdown.
Super conscious thoughts, aka Sosa here. You asked us to share some thoughts on the mask, and now thinking about, children returning to school and how these masks literally, as somebody said, rob us of our individuality, our personality, our character, and most of all, our humanity. Lipton talks about, as it affects us on the whole immunological sense, and how it retards our immune system into thinking counterproductively.
You literally cannot mandate somebody to wear a mask.
You telling me that you actually lied to us back in April, but now I'm supposed to believe you? It's a joke.
We should be allowed to choose what we want to do with our bodies.
A virus is so tiny, it could pass right through there. So if I'm going to get infected and it's so deadly, I should not be encouraged to wear a mask. I should be encouraged to stay at home and don't go anywhere at all. And we were encouraged to stay 6 feet apart and stay home when you can, just go to the essential places. Cool. But a pandemic, a real one that is very deadly, as they have told us so many times, would not be stopped by a mask. A virologist, they wear complete gear. I mean, lots of it. So a mask it's absolutely like just walking up to a mesh fence and saying, I'm protected, because you're not, if that's what it was. A virus is so tiny. This is common sense, people, and it is dangerous, and it lowers your own immunity.
Experts say wearing a mask may ensure you can still enjoy your Phase 3 freedoms.
I want people to have a certain freedom, and I don't believe in that, no. And I don't agree with the statement that if everybody wear a mask, everything disappears.
You know, the more that I think about how these masks are affecting us, you know, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, physically, and even intellectually, is a lot to put into perspective and to have a great number of people understand. But it's something that, you know, that is really concerning when we see what it is doing to our society and how it is dividing us and breaking us up and destroying the family unit even further than already the politics and the religious misunderstanding and, you know, everything that is going on in our society. These masks are just kind of, I guess, adding more wood to the fire. It's concerning, but hey, all things work for the benefit of the good of all. So I believe and have faith that we will figure things out and we will come up with solutions to these problems that we continue to see, because that's what humans do. We evolve, we innovate, and we...
Don't listen to the spin doctors, people!
If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you want to get contact traced, get contact traced. If you want to get a vaccine, get a vaccine. But you're not going to tell us to do what we don't want to do.
So that's a demonstrator in Toronto gathering with others, not wearing masks. As you can see there, they're heading onto the train, public transit there. And in Toronto, public transit requires all passengers to wear a mask. Now, this group of people, they're in fact part of two groups, Mothers Against Distance and Masks Over Hugs. Their message is freedom of choice when it comes to wearing a mask. Safety measures need to be followed or all efforts to combat the virus will be lost. But with these bylaws in place, businesses have a choice, as well as indoor facilities. They can choose whether or not they want to mandate the wearing of masks.
Greetings, family. Well, we all wear a mask, but the sheep wear a mask on top of their mask. No, thank you. I'd rather just wear one mask.
At least for now.
Unsere Forderung ist zurück zur Demokratie, weg mit den Gesetzen, die uns einengen, weg mit der Maske, die uns zu Sklaven macht.
Hello, family. I choose not to wear a mask because I would rather boost my immunity system by eating healthy and exercising and being well, instead of wearing a mask that will compromise my oxygen and breathing and dehumanize myself. I see it as a symbol of being silent, covering your mouth, being silent, and now is not the time to be silent.
Wir sind heute hier, weil auf der ganzen Welt nur noch wenige Wissenschaftler, die regierungstreu berichten, gehört werden. Es gibt Tausende, Abertausende Wissenschaftler, Ärzte weltweit, die werden nicht gehört, die werden mundtot gemacht, die werden zensiert oder als Verschwörungstheoretiker diskreditiert, obwohl sie ganze Universitäten geleitet haben. Dagegen protestiere ich. Ich möchte den Konsens, der früher möglich war und jetzt nicht mehr erlaubt zu sein scheint.
If this virus is something that we need to get over, then we need to catch it, we need to deal with it, just the way human beings have been doing for millions of years. Our very freedoms that so many people fought and died for are being threatened right now by our elected officials. Masks make it difficult for people to breathe. Oxygen is something everybody's body needs to fight off disease, whether it's cancer, viruses, bacteria. We need oxygen, and the mask gets in the way of that.
So many Americans were afraid of contracting this deadly virus, quote unquote. Nobody would leave the safety of their homes so many times like the average American. If COVID-19 was as deadly as the government was making it out to be, there would be death everywhere, like similar to the bubonic plague. Not just people with super compromised systems, people who were already, knocking on death's door. God forgive or forbid, that, someone's life be gone. But, not just that, fear mongering, fraudulent testing, and lying on someone's death certificate. not to mention, mainstream media, are all just the perfect ingredients to stir up turmoil amongst the populace, distract people from what's going on.
Don't let what the government say or the media or anybody control you. If somebody make you mad, they control you. If somebody make you put on a mask, they control you.
We are supposed to be physically distancing, wearing masks. We have a motion and a second to continue this meeting to another date. All in favor, say aye. Can we have discussion? Any opposed? Okay, the meeting is adjourned.
So after you ended the meeting, I know protesters went up to the podium one by one for more than 2 hours to air their grievances about face masks. And according to the Salt Lake Tribune, and I quote them, one of the moms grabbed a face mask and spit her gum out into it. "It's garbage," she shrugged, wadding it up. "It doesn't work anyway, not for me and not for my kids." And why do you think this is causing such emotional responses?
I'm slow to criticize and quick to follow and we need to come together and solve these problems.
Yeah, you're under arrest in relation to incitement.
Masks because 1, it just shows you're compliant to the fucking scamdemic bullshit. 2, it shows you have no fucking brains. 3, you also think that the virus is fucking deadly, yet a piece of cloth is going to stop it. No.
The fact of the matter is, it's our bodies, it's our choice whether we're gonna wear them, not wear them. You guys are overstepping your boundaries.
Start wearing that fucking mask.
I am against masks because it's a complete assault on my right to breathe. And I, for one, enjoy the intake of fresh air.
I don't need no mask when I'm in nature, when I'm anywhere. Cause I'm protected, baby, you hear me? My ancestors behind me, I feel them.
Class to class, as has been the norm in past years, teachers will instead rotate between these student pods to provide supervision and instruction. This will minimize the amount of interpersonal contact occurring each day. Students will be allowed to leave their pods in order to attend specific electives like band.
You don't have to wear a mask over no fake virus, but you ain't hear me?
I'm against masks because they are a slippery slope into losing our rights gradually and making us fall into this normative culture of, yes, I'll just do one more thing that you say, until we're slaves. Also, I have history of having asthma, so it literally makes it hard to breathe, especially in the gym where they make you wear masks. And there's absolutely no way I can do everything that I want to do with a mask on. Stay woke.
I can't breathe! I can't breathe!
Come on, man. It's the same shit.
And why I don't wear a mask. I think it's truly fear-based, and you can see the fear in people's eyes as they're walking around and suffocating themselves, their spirits, the faith in the universe. These basic things, being clean and stuff like that, they're coming back. Where did they go? But I also don't believe in, vaccinations and stuff like that. I believe holistic remedies are the best way to go. Let me know, this is my personal opinion, but I choose to not live in fear and to let my spirit be free.
Look, this is the government talking, right? Wear a mask. COVID is real. You're gonna die. Okay. But how? You don't question it, you just start wearing that shit.
The president's supporters telling me masks weren't necessary.
No, I don't wear a mask, even though I have my immune system is a little compromised because I'm a breast cancer survivor.
Are there any medical conditions that would prevent someone from wearing a mask?
There aren't a lot, Michael. I mean, there are certainly some people, maybe for PTSD reasons or severe claustrophobia, psychologically may not be able to wear one. But in general, if someone is well enough to be out in public, they're medically well enough to put some kind of face covering or mask on.
Many people believe wearing a mask eliminates the need for social distancing. but this is incorrect, and please tell us why.
Question everything. Do your own research. Just know, man, I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing it for y'all, bro. Because all this really is like a test. Everything's a test.
What do you say to get them to change their mind?
Stop wearing that fucking mask.